Welcome back to another Facebook Live. My name is Yocheved, and I'm again with you tonight, sharing with you something that I heard that was very, very touching and very, very powerful. I know right now we're all thinking about the world events, and a lot of people are deep in thought and trying to, deal with things emotionally, physically. The mood is not the same as it was. But I came upon a lecture that wasn't talking about the current events. It was discussing more about our children and the differences and how each one of our children is very unique in its own way. As a parent, I could very much relate to this lecture. I could very much understand the severity, the depth of this topic as a whole, in understanding that we can have 10 different children, and yet each one of our children is unique, special, and sometimes even challenging in their own way. Hi, Mama Lizachka, or Mona Lizachka, sorry about that. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining me today. And when I heard this lecture, I actually heard it a couple of years ago. It was a lecture given by Rabbi Jacobson. I wrote the lecture down, as I usually do, because I felt very much connected and inspired. But in the last few days, the lecture resonated with me more than ever before. Today, as I re-listened to this beautiful lecture, it's a very long lecture, very emotional lecture, I all of a sudden realized that there are moments in our life, each one of us as a parent, where sometimes we feel challenged, or we feel like, Hashem, I don't really understand why things are happening the way they're happening. Is it because I am not good enough of a parent? Or is it because my child is just trying to push my buttons? And we start questioning ourselves, and we start questioning the behaviors of our children. And then when I re-listened to this lecture tonight, I finally understood more than ever before that each one of our children is very unique. Each one of our children is very special. The mistake that most of us make is we picture for ourselves this cookie cutter child. We picture for ourselves that our children need to be a certain way in order to make us proud, in order to make us feel like we accomplished something, raising them as our children. And when our children don't act a certain way, or act in a way which by accident make us feel embarrassed of them, or maybe they have a disability and they're not so physically perfect, all of a sudden that cookie cutter, picture perfect life that we once envisioned goes down the drain. We start questioning this beautiful child that God has gifted us with. And this is the biggest mistake that we can do as parents. Each one of the children that God gave us, they come with certain gifts. Sometimes we don't necessarily understand those gifts. Sometimes those gifts are even there to help us as the parent become a better version of ourselves. It teaches us how to reshape our personality, how to develop the patience we never thought we could. And when God gives us that beautiful child, even though that may be a child which we don't quote unquote think as perfect, that too is a test. That too is a demonstration of Hashem looking down and saying, how are you going to treat this diamond that I entrusted you with? Every child you have is a diamond. It's precious. Yes, it's not always a polished, perfect, shining diamond, but it's still a diamond. Its value doesn't diminish because of the way it's polished or because of the way it shines. its value stays true to itself. I'm going to share some very powerful stories that I heard in this beautiful lecture. If anybody is interested to hear the entire lecture given by Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson, you could message me privately and I will send you the link of the entire lecture. But I will tell you that the lecture is very, very emotional and very sensitive. There are stories there which can be very touching. But I personally learn from very touching, emotional stories because that helps me connect better to the story. He starts off by saying he was once at a bar mitzvah of a very good friend. And when he meets the father of the bar mitzvah boy, he starts dancing with him. But after the music finished, the bar mitzvah boy's father comes up to Rabbi Jacobson and says, "Rabbi, tell me the truth. Did something good come out of me? What do you think? Be honest with me. How am I to you? Do you think something good came out from me?" And the rabbi didn't understand. Why would a father of a bar mitzvah boy ask him such an odd question in the most happiest day? This is his son's bar mitzvah. And he says to this man, "Why do you care about this right now? You have 5 beautiful children. You have a beautiful wife. Look at where you are right now. You're celebrating your son's bar mitzvah and you want to know if something good came out of you? Why would that even be in your mind?" And the father looks at Rabbi Jacobson and says, "Many years ago, when I was a small child, and I was still in elementary school, you remember we were in school together, the principal told me the following words, and I will never forget it. And he didn't even tell it to me once. He repeated it twice the following year. And for the last 34 years, those words are engraved in my mind. And I think about them every single day. That principal asked me, 'Why are you wasting your time in the school? Look at you. You think something good will ever come out of you?' And he says he told me this 2 times in a row. And every day I think to myself, maybe he was right. Maybe nothing good will ever come out of me. Maybe I'm really not such a good child. Maybe I'm really not capable of anything. So just answer me, Rabbi Jacobson. Was he right? Did anything good come out of me?" What do we see from this story? Sometimes we feel like the words we tell our children, the words we tell our students, the words we tell people, maybe they're just words. Maybe they don't really mean much. We're just saying it. We're just talking. But some words can leave a lifelong impact, especially in the child's heart, especially in the mind of the child who's still small and not fully developed. When we're not careful with what we tell our children, we diminish their self-esteem. We crush them without even knowing it. Yes, our children come in different sizes, shapes, forms. Their education levels are different. Their interests are different. The way they respond to us as parents may be different. Some children, they're A students. It's easy with them. They go to school, they come back, and they're always getting hundreds. They're making us so proud. And then you have those children that really push your buttons. They do everything you tell them not to do. They go places you tell them not to go. They do things that you say shouldn't be done. And then you wonder, but why? Did I really raise such a child? But how come my child is not like me? When I was small, I didn't act like that. I was so easy for my parents. Where did he even come from? That's the mistake we make as parents. Our version of what we think our children need to be like is not necessarily what the potential of this child really is. We need to erase what our version for our children is in our mind. and picture for ourselves the world for these children, for this individual. Look at this individual per child's talent. Maybe he's not an A student. Maybe his idea of having a good time is not what you think is a good time. Maybe this child is not good at cooking something, but is very good at building something. There are so many talents within each one of our children. When we cross out our expectations and we come down to the level of our child, all of a sudden we look at our child for who he is meant to be, not who we want him to be. When we block out, what does the world think of our children? What does the world think of us as parents if our children are not, quote unquote, perfect? It doesn't matter what anyone else will think. Because at the end of the day, when a child knows that there are parents who will never give up on them, who will never judge them, who will never feel embarrassed and ashamed from having them, that child will never be lost. Because one day, when that child understands what the parents were saying, what the teachers were saying, when he finally understands that everything that was said is for the child's own benefit, that child is going to be able to come back home, is going to be able to say, let me go back to my mother and father. Let me call my teacher or principal. But when we start to make our child feel humiliated and ashamed and embarrassed for even being our child, that child is going to look for acceptance outside of the house. Is going to look of where do they really love me? Because they don't love me in my house. They don't love me in my school. So let me find friends and those that really accept me for who I am. And many years later, finally, when the child grows and understands, that child is not going to come back to us because they have found a world outside of the house. And we need to be very careful because yes, parenting is a very difficult job. Parenting can be very stressful, but needless to say, if Hashem gave us a certain child with certain character traits, then we are the perfect parent for that child. There were a bunch of stories that I came to share here tonight, but I don't want this video to be too long. So I'm not going to share all the stories in one video, only because I don't want the video to be very long for the sake of timing. There are two beautiful stories, actually three, but I'm going to say this story that I think is important and maybe share the other short story. If not, like I said, you can message me for the link and I will share with you the entire lecture that was beautifully said by Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson. He says another very emotional story. It was told to him by his brother. His brother used to give lectures once a week in Manhattan. And one day he says there was a man who looked like he was in his 30s. He came to the lecture, and shortly after the lecture started, the rabbi's brother noticed that this man who's 30, he has some motor impairment. He's physically impaired. And then when he heard this boy start talking, he noticed that this boy also has a disability. He can't talk very well. He talks, but there's some, you really have to pay attention to what he's trying to say because he can't verbalize very well. And he wanted to get to know this boy. So Rabbi Jacobson's brother came up to this 30-year-old man that came to his lecture for the very first time and started asking him questions. Where is he from? Where does he live? Who are his parents? And he found out shortly after that when this boy's mother was pregnant, his parents are very rich people. They're very wealthy. They own a lot of houses in Manhattan. They're the kind of people, they're activists. They always go from dinner to dinner, from this social event to that social event. They were very well known in the community. And when this mother was pregnant with this child, the doctor tells these parents, you're going to have a child, but this child is going to have a disability. He won't be a fully able child. You're going to have to work a lot with him. He's going to require a lot of attention. We don't know yet what exactly his disabilities are going to be, but he's going to be fully needing child. You need to be prepared to be with him almost all of his life. When the parents of this boy found out that this child is going to be disabled, and they were the type of parents that were all over the world, they were activists, they thought to themselves, we're going to have a disabled child? We can't manage a disabled child. It's going to overturn our entire life. So when the mother gives birth to this child, they decide they don't want to even have anything to do with him. They don't want to get to know him. They don't want to meet him. They took this baby and they put him directly into a group home. A home that's going to care for this child, raise this child, and take care of this child for the rest of this child's life. The group home was not far from the parents' home, but the parents refused to meet this child. They wanted nothing to do with him. One thing they did, they financially provided for this child. So the child was able to have any therapist he required, any extracurricular activities he needed. Money was not the issue. And when this child came to this rabbi during the speech, he expressed to the rabbi that he wants to finally get to know his parents. He wants to meet them. It's been 30 long years. He wants to see who they are. The rabbi finds out through the group home who these parents are and decides to make a phone call to the father of this child. He calls the father of this child. The father picks up and the rabbi says to the father, I know this is not a phone call you were expecting. I understand I'm calling you out of nowhere. Hold on, just listen. I met this 30-year-old boy. He's such an amazing, beautiful man. This boy is your child. I know you never met him. Please allow me to introduce you to him. The next thing this man, the rabbi sees is the phone goes click, dead. This man, the father, hangs up. He's not interested in this conversation. He decides to call him again. He dials his number. And again, the father picks up the phone. And he says, please, don't hang up on me. Like I told you a few seconds ago, I'm here with your son. He's an amazing, and as he's talking, the father of this boy says, please stay out of my business. Do not call this number again. And again, hangs up the phone. Now, the rabbi is in a dilemma. He sees the boy really wants to meet his parents, and he really wants to make it happen. A few months go by. The rabbi refuses to give up on this boy. He refuses to give up on the idea of reuniting this boy with his parents, who simply are living 10 minutes away, who never saw their child face to face. The rabbi decides to go a different way. He decides to call the mother. A few months later, he dials the mother's number. The mother of this 30-year-old boy picks up the phone and the rabbi tells her, Mrs. So-and-so, I'm very sorry to interrupt. I know I'm catching you off guard. I know it's been 30 years, but please allow me to introduce you to your child. I just met your son. He is one of the most smartest, caringest, beautiful boys I've ever met. Please, let me introduce you to your child. I really want him to have the opportunity to meet you. The mother says to the rabbi, don't let me revisit the decision we made 30 years ago. This discussion is closed. I don't want to hear anything further. And the rabbi cuts her off and he persists and he says, please, Mrs. So-and-so, there are so many orphans in the world, so many children whose mother passed, or maybe the father passed, or maybe both parents passed, and they will never get the ability to meet their child. All they can do is ask others, can you talk about my parents? Can you tell me how they were? And others will tell them about their parents. You are alive. Your husband is alive. Doesn't your child deserve to meet his parents? I'm encouraging you to please take me up for my offer. I want nothing from you, and your son wants nothing from you. All your son wants is the opportunity to see you face to face. He wants the opportunity to meet you. He wants the opportunity to know that there was a time in his life he was able to meet his biological parents. And I'm telling you, you will not be disappointed. You will fall in love with this boy the way I did. The mother, now she calms down and she says to this rabbi, I don't mind meeting my son, but in order for me to do that, you have to get through to my husband. If my husband agrees, I am ready to do it. With that, she hangs up the phone. The rabbi, once again, the day passes. He picks up the phone and he calls the boy's father. The boy's father already prepared because the mother already spoke to him. He picks up the phone and the rabbi the same way starts convincing this father, saying, please, your son wants to get to know you. He wants nothing from you. He doesn't want you to do anything. He's not going to ask you to visit him anymore. He's not going to ask you for any more money. He just wants the opportunity to get to know you. And he tells him the same thing about children whose parents have passed and that you are still alive. And after this long conversation, the father finally says, let me think about it. Give me a day or so, and hangs up the phone. Now the rabbi feels better. At least he says, let me think about it. At least he's not giving up the idea. Again, he calls him the next day. The father says, I'll meet my son. I'll meet him. Only in one condition. I want you to be there. I want you to also come with my son. The rabbi says, no problem. They all go to the address provided by the father, to a penthouse in the city on Central Avenue. It was a beautiful penthouse. It was on the top floor, and you could see the entire Empire State Building in Manhattan. It was an amazingly rich penthouse. And there on the table were a box of chocolates. It was very odd because you see parents, you see a child that never met them, and then you see a rabbi. Nobody knows each other. So what do you talk about for the first time after seeing a parent and a child? How do you break the ice? So the rabbi starts talking about the weather and about sports and about politics. And 10 minutes into the conversation, the rabbi tells the parents, okay, let's talk about what we really came here for tonight. We didn't come here to talk about the weather, the politics, the sports. Let's really talk about why we're here tonight. You see this boy right here? This is your son. The boy looks at the parents, looks straight in their eyes. And this is the words he tells his parents. The boy had a problem pronouncing the ah because he had a disability. And one of the disabilities, he couldn't say daddy, mama, because he couldn't pronounce the ah. So for him, he was able to say, oh, papa, mama. So he looks at the parents and he says, papa, mama, I'm not perfect, but you're also not perfect. I forgive you for your imperfections, and I hope you can forgive me for my imperfections. I will move on from your being imperfect. And I hope you can also move on from me being imperfect. With that, the boy breaks out into tears. The mother couldn't resist her tears. She comes to her son, embraces him and hugs him, and starts crying. The father, too, couldn't hold himself back when he heard his son's words. He came to his son, hugs him tightly, and all this rabbi witnesses is a disabled child who knew his imperfections, who knew his disabilities, who understood the reason why his parents no longer wanted him from birth is because he wasn't that perfect child, whose first sentence to those parents were, "I forgive you because you're imperfect, but please forgive me because I too am not perfect." With that, the rabbi leaves the room and gives the parents the ability to reunite with that child. But what lesson do we all learn from this very moving and touching story? Our children are not perfect, and we're not perfect. Did we forgive ourselves for our imperfections? Did we forgive our children for their imperfections? Because there's no such a thing as a perfect cookie cutter child, and there's no such a thing as a perfect cookie cutter parent. As a parent, we ought to make mistakes. We're not going to be happy and smiling every day of our life. And when our children don't necessarily go our way, don't beat yourself up and say, "It's my fault." Maybe you didn't do it 100% of the time, but you did the best you could have done as a parent. Same goes true for the child. The child will do the best they can do as our children. Our job is to encourage them, to uplift them, to support them, to remind them that yes, they fail sometimes. Sometimes they make mistakes. Sometimes they're not perceived to the world as being that perfect child. And maybe they have a disability, but who cares? At the end of the day, they are our gift. They are the gift that God entrusted us with. We were chosen to be that parent for that particular child. We were given that mission that this particular child belongs to us. Therefore, we need to tonight look at our children, go to them in their bed, hug them, kiss them, and remind them that we love them no matter what. And the next time your children make a mistake, or you get a phone call from the principal, or the child brings you back that grade, or does something you told them not to do 100 times, and you feel like yelling and screaming and putting them down, and you feel like, how many times can you say the same thing over and over again? Take a step back, take a deep breath, and remind yourself, your child is doing the best they can do with the tools they were given. You need to help them, shape them, be there for them. But that doesn't mean you need to blame yourself as not being the perfect parent. Be nicer to yourself. Remind yourself you're doing everything you possibly can. But don't ever feel ashamed of your children. I hope somebody is going to benefit from this live tonight. I hope somebody is going to benefit from the ability to understand that we cannot allow the world to dictate what perfect children look like. Each one of us will dictate our own perception of perfection. And we will all accept what God gave us fully, without any regret, shame, humility, or embarrassment. Once again, go hug your children. Remind them that you love them, and be proud that you have them. Have a good night, ladies. Thank you so much for watching. Once again, we'll see you next time.